Hey guys, Omerko here, self-taught web developer. On my YouTube channel there are many JavaScript videos that you can find. Some of those would be for some specific features of JavaScript, but there are also real-life projects with JavaScript on my channel. In this video we will take a look into another JavaScript feature called hoisting or memory hoisting. Before we do anything about the memory hoisting, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, as there are many of you who are watching my videos but still not subscribed. So please subscribe to my channel so you could get notifications every week when I post a new video. So first of all, let's talk a bit about memory hoisting. After that, I will also show you a clear example of it so you could see it in an action. Memory hoisting is a term structured from two words. First one stands for a memory and the second one stands for a hoisting. JavaScript uses this kind of a feature to hoist specific lines of code and save those in a memory. The feature itself is very used in JavaScript, even though we are not seeing it clearly while we code. So to see a hoisting in an action, I will first create the variable of full name and I will pass a value here like John Doe. So now we do have a variable and which is this full name, and its value is John Doe, a string. Next to this variable I will also create a function, so function called hello world, and this function will return hello world string to me as a string here. So here we do have a variable and our function that we can use obviously in a JavaScript. Once the JavaScript is running and it is reading through the file, it will read from top to bottom. So by this example, it will first read variable of the full name and it will read the value that is passed to it. Then it will skip the line 2 because there is nothing here, and on the line 3 it will read the function of hello world, it will go into that function and it will know that it needs to return this specific string from this function. So how hoisting works here? Well, as JavaScript is reading the code from top to bottom, everything that is named will be hoisted to a top of the JavaScript file. Which means if I reuse this full name variable and I change its value to Jane Doe, this will mean that once JavaScript reads this line of code and it reads this line of code, and once it comes to this function, the function itself in a JavaScript object will be moved from this position to this position right here. Because the function itself is a named property here, named hello world, and the full name down below on line 7 is, well, basically we are reassigning different value to it. The variable itself already exists. So the JavaScript will grab only the named line of code and it will hoist that code, so it will move it to a top basically. So it is easier for a JavaScript to read and also to execute the code. So for this example here, I will now remove this full name and I will try to console log on a first line of code, so console.log, and I will just console log my full name variable. This full name variable is at the top of my file, but it should not hold any data because there is no full name variable yet assigned. So we are doing that on a line number 3. To check that in our console, we can see that the variable itself doesn't have any value, it is undefined. But JavaScript still knows that there is this full name variable. And the reason why it knows about it is because of that hoisting. It hoisted that named line of code, which was our full name variable, and once it hoisted it, it knew that there is this kind of a variable, but the value itself from it is still not read at this point. To show you this more clearly, if I would fully remove this variable and then go into my browser, In my browser right now, we don't have that undefined value, but we do have this reference error, as the full name is not defined at hoisting.javascript file. Now, as we don't have the variable at all in the file, well, JavaScript couldn't hoist it because there is none of it. So the whole file doesn't know about this full name, so it is not defined at all. And that is why we do see an error in this example and not undefined value as we saw earlier. So now let me show you the same example but in a more graphic way. So let's say that we have a JavaScript file, and in that file we do have our variable of name which holds a value of John Doe. Next part of our file will reassign that variable, well, the value to that variable, which will now be Jane Doe. And the last part of our file will be our function of hello world, which will just return this hello world string to us. So what truly happens when JavaScript do this hoisting? The hoisting itself is just the part of preparation for JavaScript. JavaScript must first prepare the file so it could execute it. When JavaScript do the hoisting, it will grab only the named lines of the file. For example, our first named line is our variable of name. Then the next named line that we have is function of hello world. So JavaScript will grab that function and it will move it to a top. Well, to JavaScript this function is more important than reassigning the name variable as we do in this example. This means once JavaScript finish up with the hoisting, well, with its own preparation, the JavaScript will now hold the name, our variable, and then the function. And the rest of the functionality, like our reassigning of the data, will come after those named properties. Now, to jump a bit away from the topic, just to remind you that on my channel, next to this hoisting video that you are currently watching, there are many other features of JavaScript that we explored, and you can find different videos for those as well. And next to those features, you can also watch and code whole projects with JavaScript. As an example, you can code your own calculator with JavaScript, or you can code your multi-step form with JavaScript, and even a machine learning project with Brain.js. And now we talked a bit about the hoisting, but what about the first word of this term, called memory? Well, you see, once JavaScript reads the file, it must save those named lines, those named properties, well, in some kind of a memory. So later when it executes the file, it will know from where to call those properties, those functions, variables, and so on. The good example for this here would be, well, I will first remove all of the code from my hosting.js file, and I will console log my window here. Window stands for a whole window of my browser. In my browser, in the console, I will see that log of window, and if I open it up, I will see all of these different methods and variables that we can use. There are even the names of the events right here. So, as an example, if I would now create the variable of full name, and I will assign John Doe value to this variable, and go back to my console, and if I would open up this window once again, keep in mind we can scroll down, and at some point we will have this full name variable, which is John Doe. Well, we created this one. You see, all of those named properties like our variables, functions, and so on that we can have in a JavaScript, those will definitely be hoisted to the top of the file. But next to that, JavaScript will save those in a memory. Well, in this example, in the window object, and by this here, JavaScript will be able to execute these specific named properties. So you can see here how memory and hoisting works together. So let's just see if you understood how JavaScript will execute the file, well, the code. First of all, the JavaScript will read through the file, well, from top to bottom. There is one thing that will JavaScript do before its preparation, hoisting, and executing. That thing is, well, basically the JavaScript will look for errors. If error happens while JavaScript is reading the file, which means that developer made a obvious syntax error, then JavaScript will stop reading the file and just throw that error back to a developer. So at that point, the reading will stop and hoisting won't happen, preparation, any kind of preparation won't happen, and also executing the code won't happen definitely. That is why when we do have some error, we cannot read the code after the error, because JavaScript stopped reading the code right there where the error happened. But if there is no error, JavaScript will jump into preparation mode. In that mode, JavaScript will grab all of those named properties and it will do the hoisting for those. It will bring those properties up, so it knows where it needs to save those properties. Once the hoisting is finished, those properties will be saved in, well, in this example, window object. There is no window object on a backend side, so when we are using Node.js, Node.js will save those properties in a process object instead of a window one. And that stands for the whole preparation of the code for a JavaScript. So once the JavaScript finish up with the preparation, hoisting and saving into a memory, then the JavaScript will execute the code. And all of this seems a lot of work for a JavaScript, but it will all happen in a blink of an eye. That is why when we run our JavaScript code, it will, well, basically load in less than a second, if the code is readable for a JavaScript to read it. So I truly hope that you understood how hoisting will work, how the hoisting and memory will work together, and how the JavaScript will execute the code. Even though this reading, executing and part of the errors is not a part for the hoisting itself, I had to explain those terms as well, so you could get a grasp of the hoisting and memory hoisting, how it will work. Now, once again, if you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel, as there are many of you who are watching my videos but still not yet subscribed. Once you subscribe, make sure to click that bell icon so you could get notified when I post a new content on my YouTube channel. But this will be all for this video. If you liked what you saw, please click like and subscribe, as I'm posting new content weekly. Thank you once again, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.